Welcome back to another video. It's been a long time since I've done a video on the car, but I'm in the middle of just doing some gearbox work. I've currently got the gearbox out of the car just now. I've had a lot of people asking about specific things on the car, engine mounts, drive shafts, wiring, different things on the car, so I thought I'd use this video as an opportunity to go over some things in a bit more detail. So the first thing I've got, easiest thing to get, was the drive shafts. A lot of people ask when you're doing a 2ZZ conversion, what drive shafts to use, what CV joints to use. There's no right or wrong answer for doing the conversion. It's basically just what's available or what you can work with. A lot of people in different countries have different options, but this was the easiest option I had. So the inside of the drive shafts are both standard Corolla. So these inner CV joints are both standard Corolla parts. They've not been changed in any way. They're just straight out of the gearbox, and they've been just kept with the engine. The outer joints are both just Starlet non-ABS joints. Again, nothing fancy about them. They are brand new joints, but they're just off the shelf from a Motor Factors. The shafts in between are custom made by a company in England. When it came to doing the drive shafts, I just searched online for companies that make custom drive shafts, emailed them, contacted them, told them what I was thinking about doing, and asked them what the process was for doing the shafts, and then worked from there. So basically I got to a standard Starlet shaft, a standard Corolla shaft, cut the shaft in the middle, and then put each end in the car, worked the suspension up and down to work out the travel, the length of the shaft, and then when I was happy with the length, I welded the two shafts together. So half of a Starlet shaft welded to half a Corolla shaft, stripped the shafts down, took all the CV joints off, and then sent them down south to the company, who then copied the shafts, copied the spline, the profile, copied everything from the shafts to make them one, and then I sent them back and I rebuilt them, and they just fitted on the joints, and they've never gave me a problem since. They fit in the car perfectly. Never had a problem with any braking, any wear, anything like that. These are still the first shafts I've ever put in the car. All I've done is replace the outer CV joints just for brand new ones. But there may be other shafts out there that can be a direct fit from the gearbox to the hub. I didn't play about with different shaft sizes, different lengths. I just did it this way and it's worked perfectly for me. So it may be something I need to revisit in future when I've got more power in the car, but at the minute it's working perfectly every time I use the car. So the next most asked about thing would probably be the engine mounts. Again, same as the drive shaft, there's no right and wrong answer with engine mounts. It's just whatever works for yourself. When I fitted the engine, I didn't have any or very little guidance or measurements or anything like that. It was just very much get the engine in the bay, get it to a position where I thought it should sit, alignment of drive shafts, that kind of thing, get it kind of central and level in the bay. No really any right and wrong answer, but it seems to work fine. There is modifications has to be made to the chassis. This engine doesn't fit in without it. Again, I get asked a lot, does it just bolt straight in? It is not a bolt-in conversion. It needs chassis modifications. It needs custom parts made. Not greatly difficult, but they do need to be custom made. So looking at the chassis from the gearbox side, so you can see I've got two flat plates with captive nuts. All of them have got captive nuts welded into them. So these old engine mounts, the original Starlet engine mounts, were all removed. The chassis was all cleaned, and then there was holes made in the chassis so that the captive nuts could sit in these two plates here. I've got four captive nuts welded in. I'm just using the original Corolla mount. There's nothing changed about this mount. That's as it come off the car. All I've done is just put a new bush in it, but it's not modified any other way, and this just bolts straight onto these plates. There is a step in the mount that you do have to have a washer or a spacer made so that it sits flat. Obviously the Corolla has that as part of the chassis, but I've just got a washer fitted in with the plates, and that takes up the gap, and it just bolts on as it would in the car, nothing different about it. The engine side, again, it's the mount's not been modified in any way, it's just as it come off the car, the Starlet mount's been completely removed, and then there's been plates welded in with captive nuts in them, the same as it would be on the car. So the engine mount brackets that actually bolt onto the gearbox and the engine mounts have been slightly modified, but not in a big way. So the easiest way to show you would just be on the actual gearbox. So this is a standard gearbox mount for the Corolla, which would bolt on the far gearbox side with the 3 bolts. Now on the one I've got, all I've done is I've re-drilled the holes to be in a different position. It's the same mount as it was, same bolts. Just re-drilled the holes to allow it to sit in a different position. It needed to sit in a different angle to line up, but it still bolts up with the original bolts, just slightly different holes. The front gearbox mount, so this is the one that goes on the very front of the gearbox, right next to your clutch slave cylinder. Again, it's still the original mount I'm using, but all I've done is I've had to shorten the mount, and I've had to re-drill a hole to allow it to sit in a different place. The mount on the car is still as it was, it's never changed, it just unbolted from the car, and I just had to make a custom kind of brace for it to sit on, but it still bolts onto the gearbox the same way it did when it was in the Corolla. The rear gearbox mount, this is the one that bolts on right at the back of the engine with the 3 bolts. Again, I've kept the same mounting plate. It still bolts on with the 3 bolts, as you can see, but all I've done with this mount is, it's easier to see it from the back. As you've still got the 3 bolt fitting, the same as it was on the car, but all I've done is I've chopped off the mount here, cut down the mount here, and I've cut the actual legs off. And then re-welded them on with a plate. Spaced the plate out. As the mount on the car is original Starlet mount, it hasn't changed anyway, it's just bolted onto the floor, but it was out of alignment with the gearbox, so I've bolted the mount onto the gearbox, and I've made the spacer plate to pull them across, welded the back on, and then because it sits further away from the box, and the original mount would stop here, but the new one sits further across, I've added this brace on, which bolts onto one of the gearbox bell housing bolts, just to give it a bit more strength, so it doesn't flex on the side of the mount. Again, it's never given me any problems. It's never cracked or anything like that. It seems to be pretty strong. But again, it's just a modified standard mount. I didn't have to get anything fancy made. Just a grinder and a welder and some paint, and it was all good to go. So this is a look at the front engine mount off the front of the gearbox. So I've made this brace just out of a bit of metal box section. It's also got mounts on it for the radiator to sit on, and then the original front engine mount just bolts on the Corolla. It would have a bar that runs from the front to the back subframe, which obviously I don't need, but I've still used the original standard mount. Also, the modification to the chassis, you can see this is where the original chassis would have come down to, but you have to cut this box out to allow the gearbox to come up to the sit level. It hits off the bottom. Also, you are quite close to the inside of the wheel on full lock. It's very close to rubbing on the gearbox, but you do need to do this to get the gearbox in. It won't fit without modifying the chassis like this. The speed sensor for the gearbox, while I've got it out as well, it's obviously on the original Starlet. You've got a cable speedo the cable goes into the gearbox. On the Corolla, it's run through the ABS. It just takes the wheel speed from the ABS. There's no drive on the gearbox at all. I think I might have on this gearbox, it's just got a blanking plate down here for the speedo drive, just a blank, but that just comes out. You unbolt that and the plug comes out of the way. These are electronic speedos from, I think, RAV4, some other different Toyota models of that age, kind of about 2000 to 2006. You get these on eBay, different lengths for different styles of gearbox, but it is just a speedo drive, 3-wire sensor, and it just allowed me to take speed off the gearbox and wire it into the ECU. It is an aftermarket ECU, but again, it depends on what options you've got, but these do fit straight in. I've not had to modify the diff. The diff's got a wheel on it that drives the speedo, and it just fitted straight into the gearbox and worked the speedo once it was calibrated with no issues at all. The brakes are another quite popular question I get. Quite a simple solution for bigger brakes. I didn't want to go with anything too big on the car with it being so light. Didn't see the point in going with 4-piston calipers or anything like that. The calipers are from a Corolla T-Sport, the same car that the engine come from. The calipers and the carriers do just bolt straight on to the Starlet hub. There was no modification to bolt it on. You can't use the Corolla disc because just the shape of the disc it doesn't fit the hub, and it sits too far back and doesn't allow the caliper to bolt on. But the carrier, the caliper and the pads all just bolt on as standard, nothing changed. The disc that I'm using is a 280mm disc, just a standard disc, nothing fancy, from a Mariva VXR. The only thing you need to modify, you need to change, is the space in here. There's the gap between the centre of the disc and the hub. They don't meet up, so I just had this little silver ring here machined. Just a local machine shop, just gave them the sizes of the hub and the disc and the depth of the ring, and they machined 2 rings and the disc just fits on perfectly. You do have to, maybe with a Dremel, the clearance in here, you need to machine a tiny bit off of the Dremel to allow the disc to rotate. The disc does hit the carrier, but again, just a small bit you have to shave off with the Dremel just to allow the disc to turn. But the pads are just Ferroro DS 2500. Discs are standard vented discs, and as I say, they just bolt straight onto the hub without a problem. Another problem you come across with the conversion is the room for the brakes. There's obviously not a great deal of room for a brake servo, so I decided just to get rid of the servo. There's a clearance issue, you know, between the back of the engine and the bulkhead. So Chase bays in America do a brake booster delete, they call it. It's for drifting and motorsport, and it's a cylinder that's made to run without a brake servo. So a standard master cylinder with the brake servo disconnected is different to a master cylinder that's designed without a brake servo. The pedal ratio is different, so the force you have to apply on the pedal and the feel of the brake pedal is different. I've never had any problems with this. It does work quite well, although the pedal is quite hard. You do have to press it quite hard, but once you're on track and the brakes are warmed up and you're pressing the brake hard, it does feel really good. I've never had any problems with locking up, and I have, you know, been stamping on the brakes on track. And yeah, it's a very, very good setup. As I say, it just bolted straight on. It was for an 86 Corolla, but it does have the same bolt pattern. It just bolts straight up, and it's a Wilwood cylinder. It comes with Wilwood reservoir. It comes with. You do have to adapt fittings, as it is an American cylinder, so the fittings are slightly different. But again, it wasn't a problem. You could just get adapters and make the correct ends. The car doesn't have ABS, it's just the brake pedal and the brakes. I've got an adjustable bias valve inside. Again, I haven't really mucked about with the settings a lot, but the brakes, you know, on track are very good. They do stop the car really well, but there isn't a lot of weight to stop. The car only weighs 850 kilograms, so it's not like we're having to stop a massive car. But yeah, the brake solution was pretty simple. The rear brakes are just completely standard, a Glanzer rear axle with discs, but yeah, standard pads, standard discs, nothing fancy on the back, just the bigger brakes on the front. So the wiring and the electronic side of things was probably the next biggest task along after fitting the engine. I did have the car running on the standard Corolla ECU, but I didn't have a speed signal going into the ECU, so it was difficult to get lift engage, things like that. The car always thought it was sitting still. So this was all still during lockdown. I decided just to go for a standalone ECU. So I managed to get a good package with all the ECU master stuff. So I just went with the full electronics, the EMU black for the engine control side, the PMU16 for the control of all the electronics. The dash as well as a 7-inch ADU. The steering wheel again has all the buttons on it for all the important things: indicators, wipers, main beam, horn, washers. Also a 8-button switch panel, which has got the kind of non-essential stuff on it: side lights, dip beam, hazards, that kind of thing. It was a massive job to wire the whole car. I did 3 separate wiring looms. I did an engine wiring loom, I did a body loom, and then did one for the tailgate, for the number plate lights and brake light and things like that. It did allow me to add in extra sensors. You know, if the car is very basic, there's only what needs to be in the car to run. There's no radio, there's no electric windows, there's no heater, there's no nothing like that. It is just what it needs to run. So yeah, the task of wiring the car was a huge task. I used the High Performance Academy wiring courses to give me help and tips on how to build the loom properly. I've not had any problems with the loom at all. It's worked spot on since it went in the car. Never had any problem with wiring, any faults, anything like that. It's just, and it's super lightweight. It's easily less than half the weight of the loom that was in the car. I mean, I can lift the whole car wiring loom up on one finger now, whereas before it was a big bag of wiring. It was really heavy and bulky, the standard wiring in the car. But also went with a lightweight battery. I went with the Deadweight Industries, their lithium iron phosphate battery. It's only 2 kilograms. It's a really tiny battery, but it's got a lot of cold cranking amps, so it still starts the car no bother. The only downside is you can't jump start it if it does go flat. You have to trickle charge it, but if you keep on top of the battery, it doesn't go flat, and it's a really good piece of kit. Closer look at the steering wheel. It's just a plate I got online with all the buttons, and it's an ECU master enclosure on the back with all the switches going in. There is only 4 wires that come out. The steering wheel is on a CAN circuit, and there's all the wires going to the unit, but there's only 4 wires come out which connect to the rest of the car. The same as the switch panel. There's 8 buttons, but there's only 4 wires, and it just communicates through CAN to the rest of the car. The PMU pretty much does all the brains behind it. It controls all the power going to everything. It does all the lights, wipers, horn, you know, power to the dash, everything like that. It's a really, really clever bit of kit. It's all configurable through the laptop. And again, the dash has got so many different menus in it. It's got lap timers, it's got loads of data that can be saved. I'm in the middle of putting a USB drive into the side of it so I can log data with a USB stick. Loads of things you can customise. Really, really good bits of kit, but I decided to go down the route of the wiring, the custom wiring, just again to make it simpler. Although it was a longer process and more expensive, it simplified the car. I know every wire inside and out on the whole car, so if there's ever any problems, it's all documented. I know where every wire goes, what it does. Very easy to find problems if it does, whereas it can get messy with this kind of thing, doing a conversion. But yeah, it was much easier to build the loom the way I wanted it. You know, adding in extra things and taking out things that aren't necessary on the engine as well, just to make it more simpler. So just showing some more things on the engine bay with the wiring. I mean, you can see all the labels I've put on the wiring. It's obviously a completely different route than what it was to begin with. It was a big chunkier, much chunkier loom that was on it. But I've obviously trimmed the loom down. You know, for instance, the coils have only got 3 wires now instead of the 4. You only need 3 wires to run the coils, you don't need 4. It's just a confirmation wire back to ECU. You don't need that. I added in a drive-by-wire throttle body. It's a much bigger throttle body. I think it's actually off of a Porsche or Volkswagen Audi kind of thing. It did bolt on to the standard manifold with 3 of the bolts. One of them, you can see at the bottom there, had to be re-drilled, but it's an offset bolt on the standard throttle body, so there was room on the actual manifold to drill into the aluminium, and then the 4 bolts just went straight on with the standard gasket. All your original stuff. We don't need the oil pressure sensor for the lift, the high lift, because it's standard ECU needs to know oil pressure, but I've still got the solenoid for controlling the lift, but just not the oil pressure sensor. Your cam sensors, your standard VVTi solenoid is still there. I've added in intake air temperature, which it has inside the airflow meter, but no longer running an airflow meter. It's just a map sensor, which is a vacuum pipe wired into the ECU. The ECU's got an internal map sensor, so there's no airflow meter on it anymore. There's fuel pressure being added in. There's a wideband sensor being added into the exhaust. Gearbox speed sensor goes through the ECU. Also added in additional oil temperature and oil pressure. You know, NOx sensors been changed. All these additional wires have been added in. Alternator is still controlled through the ECU, so there's, and this is only basic stuff. There's still a lot more can be done with the ECU. It's not near running to its full potential, but it's once you get your head around this kind of stuff, it's really easy stuff. I think that pretty much covers most of the areas on the car. I've went over as much as I can off the top of my head. If there is any other questions or anybody wants to know anything else, just, you know, give me a message or comment on the video or something like that. I'll try and answer them as best I can. I mean, I don't mind sharing information about stuff. It's just hard to remember everything I've done on the car. It's been 10 years to get to this point, so it's been a lot of work. The plan is to get it back on track in 2025. I have got a track day booked at Japfest at Silverstone, so hopefully all going well, it'll be good on track there. But yeah, I'll try and keep some more updates going on the build, but it's yeah, difficult to do videos all the time, but hopefully that covers a lot of the stuff that people are wondering about the car. And yeah, if there is anything, just give me a shout.